Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dandelion Dynasty Book 4, Speaking Bones, Part 3, Stone-Twisted Roots, Chapter 29, The Boneyard. In this chapter, we go back over the ocean, and honestly, as interested as I am to know what's going on back in Ukiugonde, is that what we call it? I could not have picked a worse time. I want this Gia thing, and I want it now. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. What's up, Kyle? He is in the chat. Lovely to have you, sir. Oh my God, I got such a... I just raised my arm in my crowdcast and there's a bruise on my arm and I didn't know it was there. It looks real bad on camera. It does not look that bad in person. But this is the result of dealing with these puppies lately because they are boisterous. So... this chapter, as I said in the intro, I am more than happy to find out what's going on here. And I'm sure I will adjust to being back on this side of the Wall of Storms. But honestly, it's just incredibly rude. Not right now, sir. No. Kyle says it's such a little stinker move, isn't it? That is that's a kinder way to put it than the way I want to put it, but yes. And, this is the sort of thing that happens in Song of Ice and Fire as well. You'll be in a couple of really good POVs that are all located in the same area. Maybe everybody is at King's Landing or it's more than one person up at Winterfell or whatever. And then all of a sudden you get pulled into a kind of nobody POV that's got very little happening, or it'll be a Bran chapter, God help us. And I just have to remind myself that even though it can be jarring and frustrating initially, I do get reinvested in this other story. It just takes a minute. Now, I'm going to be honest with you though. This chapter felt tedious to me. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think, and this is just this is my theory. Okay, so go with this for just a second. I think that as authors who are very successful get into later books in a series that has taken off, the editing process gets sort of loosened. I'll say it that way. They are maybe not as aggressively edited as they had been. And that's because the publishers have more faith in their product that it will sell. If people are listening and can hear all of these noises, I'm sorry. I got Sam in the room with me in his cone, so he is knocking into everything. But there is just a vibe to the last book somewhat, this book especially, that feels like Ken Liu is talking in circles a little bit, saying the same things over and over, and we are getting so repetitive that it's starting to feel like a foregone conclusion, certain things that I just don't feel we need to completely get into. So there's that aspect of just the way the battles go and certain things being constantly repeated or over-explained. And I mean that over-explained in the sense of the motivations for things. But I also will say that as somebody who is not an engineer, I don't care about whether a lot of the inventions he's talking about could actually work when it comes right down to it. There is a fun quality to asking yourself the question on whether it would work. And I would be super down for somebody to start a blog where they test a bunch of these inventions and see if they can get anything to really function the way it's mentioned here. I would be so fascinated by that. That said, I don't need a complete like blow by blow of every gear shaft and gas bag and whatever, because after a point it all begins to blend together in my head, and I know that he's trying. There's a sense for me of it not even necessarily being about the story anymore. It's like starting to feel like he's trying to prove to other engineers that it would really work. Like he's got readers that are fixated on this in particular, and he feels like he wants to impress them. And I don't know if that's like anything, or maybe it's just for his own, interest, but I would be like inclined at this point. I'm so sorry, you guys. This dog is being so loud. I would be inclined more toward, you could just tell me this stuff works, give me a real basic overview, and then if you want to like put a drawn schematic at the back of the book, that could be kind of fascinating, where you like show us how this would work, because I get the sense Ken Liu is drawing the schematics for himself anyway, just so that it's easier for him to describe on paper. He has them drawn out, So there's a lot here of like the way that they have created these machines, and they're Arakua Tokawa, the like bone machines, but they are enormous and made out of like many, many parts put together to make one giant skull or whatever. And it's just, I think, what sort of like fell flat for me here was the fact that we have done the, we've got machines and you don't thing so many times now. And it wouldn't probably have fallen as flat if we weren't following another couple of chapters with a giant battle where it's like, we've got little machines and you don't. Right then. This is getting into the third round of this, We already did it. We had that battle that was like extremely interesting and I was super invested in. And then we come up here and we're kind of doing the same thing again, but on like a lower scale, with like, it's just kind of anticlimactic and less impressive, these machines, in comparison to what we see being done down in Dara. It's impressive in its way, but as a reader, I am not really like that excited about it. I can understand intellectually that it's a cool idea and it is impressive and will do what needs to be done. But there's also a part of me that's like, I have read this chapter very recently, like almost exactly, And I know that that's being reductive and maybe unkind, and I don't mean to be, but I found myself rewinding constantly in this audiobook, and I usually am like completely glued to the audiobook, but I found myself completely tuning out occasionally and realizing that I had like lost the thread and having to rewind and re-listen. And I kept tuning out at sort of the same moments, which turned out, when I like was able to get myself to focus more, to be the moments where the mechanics of these things are really described. And also Tovo's POV is not interesting. I think that's another like big factor for me, is that he is trying to tell the story from the point of view of somebody who is a real basic bitch in Ryukyu. You know what I mean? Like, he's just got an extremely traditional, conservative Ryukyu viewpoint, and is the exact kind of like, I don't want to say coward, but just like, he is sort of a wannabe. It's not that much fun to read from the point of view of somebody who is like certain that they are going to be able to step up and do something magnificent. And as a reader, you know, they're not really capable of it over and over. And we've been in this kind of POV before. And I think that's also part of the feeling of like familiarity, is somebody who is underestimating their enemy, who is disdainful of the Dara people and what they can accomplish, who has, you know, the sort of reactions to the creations, and then also has to manage the reactions of their people because they know the way their people are going to react. There's a feeling here of almost being in like Kuton Rovo's head, and he's not as mad and he's not as cruel, but it's the same general sort of principle. So I don't know, you know, we jumped at Thera's POV a couple of times. We sort of go back and forth between them, but I don't think that helped matters. So anyway, Kyle says, I will agree that this book definitely gets a little indulgent in places. Indulgent's a good word. So anyway, I don't mean to start on such a negative note, but honestly, these books have been such home runs so much of the time that I feel like this is one of the first times that I'm sort of like, all right, buddy, what are you doing? And that's a pretty good record, you know? Like, I know a lot of people weren't as into the Restaurant Wars thing as I was, and that's totally understandable. It really just hit a particular spot for me. But I feel like this book is the one where I'm really starting to be like, enough already. So let's start off with the whole thing with Tovo trying to consolidate power. He is really... Here's the thing about Tovo. When I say that he's a basic bitch, I really mean that in like the sense that he doesn't have a lot of original thoughts. And the thing that he keeps doing is comparing himself to Pekyu Tenryo and talking about how he's going to unite the Scrublands the same way that the Pekyu did. And I'm like, you don't have the originality of thought or the foresight or the understanding of the enemy that he had to pull off what he did. There's a sort of vibe from a lot of people that like Tenryo was just in the right place at the right time, or just like because he was just a force of personality that he managed to get everybody doing what he wanted. And I mean, I remember this guy, and he was really smart. He was kind of a monster for sure, but he was also extremely like on top of the psychology of the people that he was up against and how to manipulate that, and understood their customs in a way that meant that certain things that other Ryuku may not have appreciated, because learning the customs of the enemy would be seen as somehow like weak. He understood the value of like opening up certain things and learning more about them, because that was also a kind of weapon. And this dude is just so incredibly unexciting in terms of the way he's approaching all of these problems. He is deciding that he is going to name himself Protector of the Ryuku, and there is like just enough trust in him that people decide to get behind him, and he recognizes that it's a very, very delicate leadership. Like, everybody could break and run at any second. And he is like, okay, we know that Thera is at the boneyard. Winter is coming, or is here, I think. But now that I've gotten these people together, I have to take her out as a threat before she gets a chance to get a foothold. And even if it's the middle of winter, we've got to do what we've got to do. I can't decide if this is a good idea on his part. I understand not wanting to let her get a foothold, especially considering how much they rely on like machinery. The more time they have, the more opportunity to build more deadly shit. I don't know. Maybe it's fine, because like I just keep thinking about the chase of the ice fleas, as he called them. And this isn't that kind of winter, so maybe it's fine. But the assault on the boneyard would have to be conducted mainly from the ground, which didn't frighten Tovo in the least. Even at the height of the Liuku-Agon Wars, when both sides fielded giant armies of hundreds of Gariniffins in each battle, the ground assault remained an important part of warfare. Gariniffins could unleash great destruction on a ground army with no air support, but air superiority alone was insufficient to subjugate a determined enemy. So yeah, they're both like short on Gariniffins. And no wonder after this whole thing went down, and a bunch of them have been like released as well, just freed, and will have to be recaptured, which I'm really interested in how that goes. So then we go over to the boneyard, and the description of it is just basically reminding me of like the Badlands in Southern California. It's a really wild place. I've been there and got to watch the sun come up, and the effect of that kind of dramatic lighting on a place that is so deeply carved is really cool, and just one of the moments that I will like remember my whole life. And it says the latticed landscape, alternating parts exposed to the merciless glare of the sun and parts in permanent deep shade, created 1,000 different miniature climate regions, each no more than a few square miles. While the parched side of the ravine felt like the middle of Lurodia Tanta, a few hundred feet away, inside one of the caves, a salty spring bubbled and left crystalline growths on the rocky walls like ice blossoms. The drastic microclimate variations also meant that the Badlands as well as the scrublands immediately bordering the region brimmed with constant, strong, but also unpredictably shifting winds in all seasons. There was perhaps nowhere in Ukigonde where navigation and sustained flight were so difficult for birds as well as Gariniffins. Viewed from above, the Badlands resembled the skeleton of some gigantic mythical creature whose desiccated skin was in the last stage of sloughing off. And that is a really, really like cool image already. And then we go to there's a part of me that almost like feels bad for Tovo. He's trying to do the call and response chant, Tenju Ju Kuparuna Liuku Kyo. And they're like responding to it, but they're not as excited as he wants them to be. And again, he recognizes that, you know, they are kind of beaten and tired. Don't trust him fully, and he's attempting to really like put a mask on, I guess, for their sake and inhabit this role as hard as he can. As they're heading forward, the absence of a large rebel Gariniffin force showed that Thera's claim to be Pekyu had by no means been acknowledged by all the scattered Agon chiefs. Still cowed by the memory of Tenryo and Kuju's harsh reprisals, most of the Agon chiefs had decided to wait and see how Thera's rebellion would play out before taking a stand. The boneyard held only a ragtag collection of freed Dara slaves, young Agon fighters with nothing to lose, and their ice tribe allies. So, he gets there about midday, and they see all of this smoke going up, and it's a real weird, like, it's a thick wall, and they're at the edge of the boneyard, so I'm assuming that they're, like, not on the top mesa looking down into it, but they're on the ground with them. And because there is such, like, there are so many rock formations that it's sometimes sort of holding the smoke in place in certain spots. But they're building the smoke with bone and dung to create something that's really thick and obscures their vision. And he's sort of like, all right, what are they doing? What's behind the smoke? Are they attempting to just hide the fact that they don't have very many numbers? And they come forward, and there's, again, like thousands of them, right? Compared to, let's see, it's 10,000 Liuku. When he is like shouting to get them to do the call and response, this time they're like more enthusiastic because they can see how few of the enemy there are and how pitiful they look. And yet the enemy does not respond at all the way that he is expecting. He's thinking that they're going to scatter, at least look like startled. I don't know. There is no reaction from them. They just keep tending the fires like it's this crucial thing. And he is really sort of bewildered by this. And, he's been tricked before. So he has a sort of streak of paranoia to him in this that's like just seasoning every thought. And I really enjoy it because despite the fact that he has this paranoia, he still fails to like predict what they're going to do. So as much as he can understand the way that Thera thinks, he is still a step behind. He can't help it. And this is what I mean about being like unoriginal. He could have taken some of what he's learned and try and make his own weapons with it, or attempt to like trick them back or anything. But he's just deciding that he's going to keep coming at it the same way that they always have. So let's see. The Liuku host, realizing their attempt at demoralizing the rebels had failed, began to murmur in confusion. Tovo would have liked to have more time to investigate, to probe and test, but he knew that morale was like the tides, rising and ebbing in accordance with forces far more powerful than the will of an individual commander. He had to act now. And, that's true. I'm not saying the man's entirely incompetent, but he's not like an outstanding star. And so he's like, all right, one of the Garinafin will be held back just in case, and the others are going to go forward and check things out. 30 Garinafins took off. They were the entirety of the Garinafin force, and something stirred behind the wall. The smoke thinned, curled, parted. 5 rebel Garinafins burst through, heading straight for the Liuku aerial assault. He's watching this like, 5? We just sent 30 into the air and they're coming at us with 5? There's no way. They have to know that this is just going to get all of them killed. What are they doing? But they fight really hard. And he was like taken off guard by this moment. Genuinely did not see them being... It's just part of their whole like failure to see the Garinafins as like conscious beings with a survivor instinct. Like they are attempting to defend themselves and their family members by rebelling. This is not just about being like stolen and taken by the rebels. They are also rebels, and it just feels like because they are so disrespected, they're overlooking something really important with this, So Thera's rebels had augmented his claws with sharpened metal sheaths, and the veteran Garinafin wielded them like the swords of Kokru dancers, slicing and stabbing like a bestial version of the hegemon reincarnate, which I was like, that sounds dope as hell. Yet 5 Garinafins, no matter what, that's not going to be enough. Gaal gave a long, loud moan, defiant as well as desperate. The bone-chilling cold affected Garinafins even more than humans. And so Tovo goes into a dive. Sam, I'm sorry, guys. There's only so much I can do. He's been quiet all day, and he's starting to get pretty restless. But I gave him some calming treats, but them shits are not kicking in. So Tovo goes into a dive, and it says Gaal winged away from the battlefield, heading north. The other rebel Garinafins, seeing their leader flee, followed. The Liuku gave chase. Tovo had instructed that it was vital that all remaining rebel Garinafins be destroyed as quickly as possible. And I'm like, yeah, this feels like they are luring you away, sir. Like, you are so certain that this is not going to be a match for you. And then they leave, and he's like, okay, now the sky is empty. How do I feel about this? And I'm like, you shouldn't feel awesome. So Tovo, even in his wildest dreams, couldn't have anticipated such a quick aerial victory. Oh, it's almost like that wasn't a victory. Whatever. And he looks at the base of the wall of smoke and then sees these rebels dousing the fires. And there are these huge figures behind where all the smoke was. And they're giant skeletons made out of the bones of all of the creatures out here. And they are, he says, 20 times the size of a regular Gerinifin. 7 massive skulls armed with ferocious canines menace the Liuku host from the ends of 7 columns of vertebrae. I mean, that's dope. That does sound dope. I'm not going to lie. There was a monumental 8-legged tusked tiger whose head was pieced together from hundreds of real tusked tiger skulls, its 2 tusks as long as the 100-year-old trees in Kiri Valley. I mean, come on. There was a gargantuan shark whose jaws seemed wide enough to swallow hundreds of warriors in one bite. Instead of fins, the shark had dozens of walking appendages shaped like the legs of wolves and tigers. And there's several others. They are, I don't think, quite as large, but they're big enough. And they're standing there, and he's looking at them and is trying to be like, guys, this is just not actually practical for the battle. They are just trying to intimidate us with these like impressive structures that look really scary, but don't actually have any ability to hurt you. And he kind of goes back to this a few times, but nevertheless finds himself recoiling and afraid. So it's like he's pretty sure, but not like sure. And meanwhile, around him, all of his people are like, what is this? They're calling it sorcery. They're thinking that it's like, something made by the gods. And then we go to months earlier. And the second part of the plan involved Thorio, but even if those plots worked, the Liuku would remain masters of the Scrublands. It was only a matter of time before a new leader emerged among the Liuku Thanes and rallied Kuju's army. To truly free the Scrublands, it was necessary to deal the Liuku army a decisive defeat, one that would convince the scattered Agon tribes to rise up en masse. The third and final part of the plan, also inspired by the visions she had experienced in the moments before taking Takval's spirit portrait, was perhaps the boldest of all. It involved fusing the native engineering tradition of the Scrublands, Arukua Tokuwa, with Dara art and craft. It would embody ancient myth in modern machinery, combine the knowledge of 2 peoples in a new language of living bones to tell a story that neither could tell on their own. So, they decide that they're going to have the site be the boneyard, which makes total sense. And it has a ton of bone in it, which is what they need for building this stuff. And also, the way that the wind shifting and everything, that's just a really good tool for the anti-Gerinifin. And it turns out like a lot of these bones are from creatures that lived before, basically like dinosaur bones. That's Sam's dinosaur bone that he dropped. It's definitely a dinosaur bone. By strategically chasing and corralling, predators could stampede entire herds of mouflon or auroch over a long drop, leaving a meal to be feasted on for days. Sometimes wounded Gerinifins met their ends here as well, often taking down wolves or tigers with them in their death struggles. And because they have this whole thing set up, I'm sort of like, are they going to just herd a bunch of them toward the edge? Like, what's up? Is that, and it's an explanation, of course, of where all the bones are coming from and how they're all piled up. But I'm seeing this as like a potential tactic that they can use. I don't know. We'll see. So at the end of the last winter, Thera's little band traveled to the boneyard and established a new secret base. Tovo busied himself with subduing Liuku Thanes, but the rebels continued to recruit and grow. And I bet Tovo doesn't know the half of it. While the larger Agon tribes hesitated, unwilling to accept the authority of this foreign woman who claimed to be the Pekyu, some of the smaller Agon tribes, made more desperate by Liuku oppression, decided to take a chance and join her. And I'm going to be honest, kids. As much as I love what it is that Thera is doing here, as much as I believe that she wants the best for all of these people, I am troubled by the concept of her as an interloper taking control of things this way. And I know that it's not the same as like a white person coming in and trying to run shit, but there's just I can't shake the feeling when people raise the concern of her not really being Liuku of agreement. I can't help but feel like, yeah, you've been here like 10 years. That's not that long. I've lived here in Texas for 10 years. And I'll tell you what, I don't really fucking feel like a Texan in any way. That's not that long a time. And I get that she's like believing in the gods, and I get that she is committed to what the mission that her husband sent her on, but nevertheless, it feels weird to me. And the fact that she wants to be Pekyu, and I have seen the Pekyus that have run this place, she doesn't have that kind of killer instinct. And I mean that in the most literal sense. I don't know how she gets these people to respect her when she is so reticent to deal out violence herself. These are people who have been taught to respect a certain kind of handling, and she doesn't handle things that way. And I don't know if she is going to try and like change who she is because she understands that, or if she underestimates the importance of handling things that way to these people, or what. But there's just a vibe for me of like, I don't fully support this, except in that I want you to not die, you know? So this is when we like have the designing of all of the creatures, and nothing of this scale had ever been attempted. There's also like the two people who are, one is Dara and one is Agon, and they are both like engineers, but they come from totally different backgrounds. So they are approaching all of their problems in different ways. And it takes a little while before they start to realize like, oh, despite the fact that we see these things in a completely different way, we actually complement each other, and these can work together. And it says after practicing with a variety of scale models and prototypes, Thera's people finally began to construct art that could imitate life. But a new obstacle arose. Many of the Agon harbored doubt whether it was sacrilege to reconstitute monsters that had been created by the gods to punish humankind for their arrogance. And, you know, Thera saying, no, it's fine, does not mean anything to them, because she is not Agon. So why would they listen to her? So Ajulek comes here, and Ajulek is the priestess who was basically telling Thera to shut the fuck up and listen for a change when they were making all like the spirit portraits and stuff, and the voice paintings. So this woman has become Thera's sort of link, I guess, an ambassador of sorts, because she fully believes that Thera is invested in the people and believes in the gods. I believe that too, I think, but nevertheless, I feel real weird about this. And I just don't fully buy that after the way things had been, that Adulek would be such a cheerleader for Thera. I'm having a hard time with this part of the story. I really am. And there's almost a sense to me of like, the Dara people having to like civilize the Liuku. And I know that's not necessarily the direction the story's going in, because it's not like Ken Liu isn't super sensitive to that kind of storytelling. Like, I don't see him making that sort of mistake. But I just don't fully believe that this priestess, after just 10 years, and it feels like somewhat recent that Thera actually went through this sort of spiritual awakening, that she would be so certain that Thera was the person to get behind. I don't know. So anyway, all the warriors are like, well, we've never done anything like this before. And she's like, yeah, well, in all of our myths, it starts with people doing shit that's never been done before. That's what you've got to do. So they get convinced and they start to throw themselves into the work. Ajulek even persuaded some of the shamans to share secret Arukua Tokua techniques that had been reserved for ritual implements in the mysteries. And I thought that was pretty cool. She says, like, to justify it, taboos were established by our ancestor heroes to protect the people and honor the gods, and they may be broken for the same purpose. So we have then this, like, you know, all of the people who are throwing together to build this thing, and we get a lot of description of how all of it physically works. And I think I've already made it clear that is not super important to me at this point. So I'm going to pretty much skip a lot of the descriptions of like the mechanisms and things. But these creatures are like shambling forward, and they sound really intimidating and look really intimidating, but they're not doing anything aggressive as of yet. Nobody knows what they're capable of. And so there's certainly a huge aspect of intimidation with that. But then there's also like a period where they don't do anything, and Tovo starts to be more and more confident that they can't shoot fire, they can't jump or fly. Like, I don't think I actually need to be as afraid of these as they want me to be. I think that's part of what they're attempting, is to just cow us. And it says Tovo could see the sight of the gigantic Arukua Tokowa giving form to ancient legends had overwhelmed his warriors. Their will to battle was waning. So he yells out, "Ready the fire cattle," which sort of like just giving an order at all makes them stop and kind of recenter themselves, because they're so used to taking orders that that's part of it for them. And it gets them back in the right headspace, which I sort of appreciated that, because that seems like the kind of thing that works for a lot of people. Like, most people out there are followers, and the word followers has gotten a real bad rap, because it's just treated like, oh, either you're a wolf or a sheep. Are you a sheep? And it's just like this ridiculously reductive thing. But a lot of people like to be told what to do. And I would be perfectly honest, I am like that a lot of the time as well. I don't really want to have to figure things out. I want to show up, do what I'm told, accomplish the thing through the work that I have been told to do, and go home, you know, in an ideal scenario. And it's not a bad thing to not want to be the one forging ahead or leading all the time. And a lot of people take comfort in somebody who has a feeling of authority stepping in during moments of crisis or doubt and taking control of the situation. You know, that's without this kind of particular conditioning that the Liugu have undergone. So with what they have dealt with, it's even more dramatic. So then the war drums begin, and this really starts to get them going, which that would definitely work on me. There is nothing like music to make me get up a head of steam and act like I'm going to completely tear a person apart. So what they're doing here is lighting cattle on fire to drive them into a frenzy and have them overwhelm the enemy. And this is the sort of thing that is only ever done in moments of extreme desperation, because they're a food source. They're a symbol of wealth and prosperity. And this is almost definitely going to kill them. But they are extremely effective if you don't have other options open to you. Fire-driven cattle could mow down entire armies, destroy camps, scatter enemy herds, and even overwhelm and trample Gorinnefins that didn't take off in time. So they stampede forward, and then we go into Thera's POV. And she's watching this and is like, what should I do? She's up here with Thorio. Thorio is kind of having a breakdown. I don't know of a better way to say that. Thorio is so scarred from the death that she has seen, especially recently with like the, infiltrating that camp, that she is refusing to do any more fighting or anything of the sort. And Thera sent her in because she was the only person who was going to be able to pull it off. But you can tell that she feels some real guilt about causing such trauma. And Thorio is just, she's like kind of, I imagine her as like rocking back and forth with her arms around her head, like just talking to her, and she's saying, death, I don't want to see any more death. And I'm going to be a bad person here. I am just kind of over it. I am a little bit impatient with Thorio at this point, and I know that's not compassionate. Thorio isn't a regular person. She is a god who came down and was like born as a fresh mind with no like imprinting on it yet. And so she is naturally going to be more sensitive and less able to understand this kind of violence. And I understand all of that intellectually. But in terms of reading about it, I am kind of tired of it. And it hasn't been that long. I admit that. But this isn't the first time that she sort of reacted this way. It does seem like it's worse now, and like she's kind of broken somehow. But as far as the interruptions in the midst of everything and her talking about how she doesn't want to see any more death, yet she's clinging to Thera and doesn't want to like be alone or away from her. So Thera has to drag this girl that doesn't want to see death anymore into a battle. I don't love it. I don't know. She's just telling her basically, don't look. And is wondering if she is doing the right thing. And she genuinely is like, I think so, but I don't know. So she pulls the black lever and all of them drop to their knees. And it turns out that this is meant to lower their center of gravity and make them a little bit more stable as these things come at them. So then we jump over to Gozofin, chief animator of the seven-headed Gorinnefin. And they help them all like descend onto their knees. And then she pulls out the white lever. And storm pipes sing. The center of this immense space was dominated by a huge sack. And they basically have made what I just kept thinking of as a massive bagpipe. And they make this like incredibly loud sound, which is so deafening that people like at the back of the line are covering their ears. Let's see. Around the battlefield, the other bone beasts, the thousand-faced tusked tiger, the clawed shark, the many-limbed wolf, the two-faced bull, all began to roar. It was as though 100 Gorinnefins, 1,000 tusked tigers, 10,000 horrid wolves had all joined the Agon and Dara, and the moaning, screeching, howling, trumpeting shook the ground and split the air with thunderous ferocity. And yet, Tovo is grinning because he's like, oh, I see. It's all sound and fury signifying nothing. They're just trying to fucking trick us. And the cattle kind of shy for a moment, but he just has them like plug their ears up so they don't get as scared and run in the wrong direction. And then they keep going. And this bit where he's just like, more fire cattle, plug up their ears. And it just says another 800 fire cattle stampeded toward the crouching bone beasts. And I was like, really? He just says plug up their ears and y'all just had stuff ready and were able to pull it. Like, it's written as if it just happened right away. And as somebody who has gotten used to this man over explaining how everything happens in these books, that surprised me that we don't get any details about them creating something to plug the ears of these animals and having to scramble to do it, and, you know, the ways that they pull it off. It's just like plug up their ears, and then they were 800 of them done. That felt like a weird shortcut to me in the midst of a chapter that is all about telling us everything. So then we have her pulling on a yellow lever, and that says, the music played by Cammy changed the moaning of a herd of Garinnifin, mournful with a hint of desperation. Silence descended, save for the pounding of fire cattle hooves over the frozen ground. So there are all these warriors coming up behind the fire cattle, and they're like, you know, getting ready to clean up what they leave behind. Oh no, sorry. Behind the line of bone behemoths. I'm thinking the cattle. I'm on the wrong side here. The frontmost rank knelt down and propped their clubs and axes against the ground, while those behind them remained standing. With practiced movements, they unfurled large pieces of Garinnifin skin over themselves, holding the hide over their head like tents. The tidal wave of fire-crazed bulls crashed against them. As bulls slammed into the barriers, the tough Garinnifin skins held and did not allow the blade-tipped horns and hoof claws to tear through, but their weight and momentum pressed the warriors back. Some fell and were trampled to death. More ran under the hides to take their places and prop up the tent shield. The first bulls leapt onto the inclined surface, running up like soldiers trying to scale a city wall. Tipo, running back and forth across the thick spine of the seven-headed Garinnifin, directed the defense of the bone beast. The fleet-footed ex-aviator found the experience of riding inside a walking Arukua Tokawa to be eerily similar to a Dara wow, guys, that was really something. A Dara airship. Fuck's sake. Ugh, guys. Anyway, so this we have a moment of like going into Thera's memory and her leaving her son with a Julek who is telling her, you'll see your son again. And she's like, is that a prophecy from the gods? And she's like, no, I'm just promising you that you will see him again. And whether it's like here in life or afterward, I will personally lead him into the afterlife if that's what it's going to take. But don't worry, I'm handling it. And I did like that moment a lot, you know, especially Thera she needs some support from somebody that it feels like really has her back. And it seems like that's what she's getting here. So, Dara archers and Agon slingshot scouts peeked from the rib cage, aiming for eyes and noses. Kulek scrambled over massive skeletons, poured sacks of grease onto the Garinnifin hide dam below. The ice tribespeople guided their dogs to attack out of holes in the wheel feet. The oil-slicked surface provided no purchase, and the bulls who had leapt onto the Garinnifin hide slipped and began to fall back. More bulls surged behind, forcing them forward, pushing them up the slick tent sides. And then Tipo says, second wave. So more of them come down and toss out torches, and all of this oil catches fire. So the people underneath, because the Grenifin hides are fireproof, they are okay. I'm sure it's hot as fuck, but, you know, it's not going to kill them. The fire skirts around the bone beast drove the stampeding bulls back. And it says, Thorio clutched Thera even tighter. The screams and howls of the dying and wounded, both animal and human, assaulted her relentlessly. And, you know, like, she's just going to be in the middle of battle for a while. Do I have to read about her absolutely freaking out the whole time? Like, that sucks. So the bulls recede. A lot of them are dead. The stragglers turned and charged back at the Liuku lines, and the Liuku just take them out. So then she pushes up the black lever, and there's a huge sound of like a cry of challenge, and all the bone creatures get back to their feet and begin to march forward again. So we jump over to the Liuku riders on the backs of the Grenifins that were chasing the rebels. And they had all gone in different directions, which causes them to break up. Each time a hunting party got close enough to a fleeing rebel Grenifin to roast it with fire breath, it somehow found a fresh burst of energy and flapped away, even those with apparently injured wings. And I am just going to go ahead and guess that they're not injured. That it just was made to look like that so that you guys would underestimate them. So Tovo is over here smiling. The fire cattle charge had never been meant to bring down the bone beasts. He had merely been probing. And he is thinking that this is really pathetic. They're just making a lot of noise. They managed to hold up against some like dumb beasts. This is not impressive, and they're not doing anything like that suggests they have more up their sleeve. So he's like, whatever, I'm going to send my people forward. And it says he turned and saw the rebel Grenifins pursued by his own returning from the north. The rebel flyers, their lift gas drained, could barely stay aloft. Swaying from side to side, they crashed into the earth behind the lumbering bone beasts as though seeking their protection. Tovo laughed even harder. He waved his signal spears frantically, demanding that the Liuku Grenifin pilots cease pursuit of the useless rebel Grenifins. So he's just assuming that they are genuinely not going to be able to take off again, which I'm pretty sure they're faking, and allows them to, you know, go back to the enemy. And then he goes into the air, and it says, just as he was about to toss out the antler-tipped signaling spear to call for the Grenifin forces to dive at the towering Arakoa Tokawa, Tovo hesitated. What if the Dara witch has yet more tricks? What if she has booby-trapped the bone fortresses against me, the same way her death boxes were booby-trapped against Pekyu Kuju? And he's like embarrassed at the fact that he is afraid, but he decides that he's going to tell himself a story here. And he's like, you know what? Using all of these like dragons against people who have no dragons is going to make the gods mad. So what if we just did ground troops instead? And then we use the Grenifins, these mighty creatures, to just pick off the last of them. And he's like recognizing that that's not exactly convincing, but he like goes with it because this is the burden of being the leader. And I did find that kind of funny. I appreciate that he has enough self-awareness to be like, okay, that's bullshit. But also, dude, you know, come on. So, Thera is watching as they come closer. Next to her, Thorio whimpered. Still, Thera waited. And then we find out what they've got up their sleeves. This is pretty wild, you guys. She gives a signal with the red lever, and all the heads of the seven-headed Grenifins snapped forward. The aggressive pose was echoed by the other bone beasts around the field. And they're making these bizarre noises. And Cammy, who is in the Gerinifin model, is working really fast. It's mentioned a couple times just how many people are necessary to move these, and they're all sweating balls off even though it's really cold out. She detached the small mouthpiece from the end of the pilot pipe. In its place, she inserted a new long bone pipe that led farther back, where it ended in a flared trumpet made from the preserved ear of an adult Gerinifin. And what they're doing is amplifying the sound of a tusked tiger's roar, which is inaudible, but some part of their bodies hear it. So Thera manages to like convince them all, no, maybe we can't hear it, but I bet it works the same way as any other sound. And they have it like caged. They've not fed it for the last day, and like they've made it as mad as they can to really get it going. And I do enjoy that in this universe, animals have like much more of a sense of self than in our universe. So this tiger is seeing that they've painted all of these creatures that they would normally be able to chase and eat on the inside of this thing, and that they're wafting the smell of like blood into its face, but they're not letting it hunt. And so it interprets this as them taunting it. And it says, standing to the side, careful to keep herself out of the tiger's sight, Cammy reached in through the bars and cut the sinew, muzzling the tusked snout. Instantly, the tusked tiger began to roar. But there was no sound inside the seven-headed Gerinifin except the creaking of bone oars, the hissing of pressurized air. And Cammy is looking at this and is just like, I really hope this fucking works, because I worked so hard on this. Like, this is one of my triumphs. And we get some like information about how this all works with comparisons to like eardrums and stuff. Not going to get into it. The actuators continued to pump at the bone oars. The silent roar, amplified 1,000-fold by the energy of the compressed air in the massive lung of the bone beast, blasted across the scrublands through the yawning maws of the seven-headed Gerinifin singing heads. Snow and smoke swirled, driven by a silent, eerie storm. So, Tovo sees all of these heads snap forward and immediately gets airborne. And he's trying to be like, I'm watching from the sky. But he's like, I know that I'm just freaked out. He's having a bit of a flashback to the way that they pulled off these like crazy winds in the north. And no wonder, like he really got soundly spanked and lost an arm. And the ways that people died sounded particularly horrifying. So he is trying still to tell himself this is just an illusion. They're not actually accomplishing anything. And his Gerinifins are circling behind him, and he's like, getting ready to tell them to attack. And his troops were about to overwhelm the Arukua Tokuwa like a tsunami, slamming into the rickety shoreside huts. And then we go into the POVs of the warriors on the ground, and they get overcome with that strange sensation of utter peace and calm and reverence that Thera experienced. And it's the effect of the tiger's roar. And it says, it pressed down upon them, sinking into their bodies and heads, crushing the air out of their lungs, squeezing the blood out of their hearts. They were connected to one another, to the muddy snow, to the swirling smoke, to the lumbering beasts of bone, to the distant figures inside the beasts, to all creation. Was this what it was like to hear the voice of the gods? Was this what it was like to be welcomed into the ranks of great heroes? They fell to their knees, their hearts and breaths slowing. And it's such a bizarre moment, because the way that this begins to go left is the pressure in their heads, which I am assuming is coming from the same source, and they're figuring out how to do this with sound. But this is not something that I remember the tusked tiger being able to do to Thera. And maybe I just forgot about the part where it turns to pain, but it seems like they've figured out how to push it even further. Or maybe Thera hadn't been in the tiger's clutches for long enough for this part to happen. They gasped and pounded their chests, trying to take in another breath to restart their stopped hearts, but their struggles were useless. The white forms of the mountainous Arukua Tokua gleamed even brighter. Color drained from the world, leaving only the stark, lifeless light of bones and the shadow of everything else. And they are touching their noses and realizing that their noses are bleeding. They're trying to stand. They can't even do that. Time to embrace the voice, they thought. Without protest, they fell to the earth. Their eyes looked into the sky, waiting for cloud Garinophins to bear them away. And that is the end of the chapter. So I guess that the sound actually kills them? I don't I don't remember what was discussed about this before. I just remember, of course, we didn't get to this point with Thera. So, yeah, that is pretty wild. And I am wondering if Tovo up in the air is affected by this the same way, because he's not exactly in front of the direct assault from the heads, So I'm really curious how much of an effect this will have on people who are a bit further back. Is it the same? Is it still? I don't know. But yeah, it's a really wild, idea to harness this. I am just trying to I also want to know where the idea for a sound that can have this effect comes from, because I know that we have a lot of sound-based weapons nowadays, but they don't, as far as I know, cause this sort of almost a euphoric sensation before things start to go wrong. It seems like they just cause an immediate pain, or I don't know. So I'm curious about that as well. But I'm going to wrap up because this was just this one chapter. It was pretty short, actually, because the chapter is just about an hour long. And normally what I cover in these sections is 2 hours worth of the audiobook material. So this was a much shorter section. But yeah, I feel like I was able to do it some justice since I had more time. So that was nice. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Apologies to those of you who were in the live, because I had to pause and leave to put Sam in his crate. And apologies to those of you who are listening later for the noise in the background, because I did my best, but I couldn't stop him. All right, everybody. Thank you again. Until next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.